I'd always been interested in my own well-being. Before I even became an architect, I was interested in that. And I would always go and find spaces that I felt improved my well-being.
Welcome to Building for Bliss, a show for the sensitive and creative entrepreneur who wants to build their business with success, joy, and ease. I'm your host, Nicolina Werther. Today I'm sitting here with Tom Manwell. Tom is an architect from the south of London, and he's also, what I find really interested in community building and well-being, and he combines all these things. So that's why I was really interested to have him on the podcast. Hello. First of all.
Hello there. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So do you want to let the listeners know like what exactly it is you do? Because yes, you're an architect, but you also do way more than that. And maybe also how you got into it, if you want to share that.
Of course, Nicolina, yes. So I am an architect, but I really, when I was studying architecture, I found myself being quite interested in not just how buildings look and how they work in terms of protecting people from the rain and keeping them warm and providing functional uses, but also how people socially interacted in buildings and how you can support community by designing buildings in certain ways. And as well as that, I was interested also in well-being and how you can design buildings that support mental health and physical well-being. And these things are quite related because I realized community is quite a fundamental part actually of human mental health and well-being. And so, I mean, as I was studying, I was thinking about these things. And then when I also in my own life practice mindfulness, and that's actually how I met Nicolina. And I kind of got to a point as an architect where I started my own practice, but I didn't feel like my practice reflected what I really believed in. And I went on a bit of a journey to what the practice that I now run, which is called Well Studio Architecture, Architectural Wellbeing, in finding a business model that really reflected my true passions and interests in the world through architecture. And yeah, that's been my journey. And so what I do now through Well Studio is I design homes for clients to support their mental and physical well-being. And I design community living spaces as well in the same way for other clients to support communities and well-being. And I've done a lot of research in those areas, and the practice is thriving and really going well.
I can imagine. I think like people must crave that. It's because it's been overlooked too in the past, I guess. And for those who watch this on YouTube, you actually could see one of your designs in the background, isn't it?
That's right. Well, this is actually a Zoom background, but it's one of my projects I did about 3 years ago for some clients, where we completely transformed their quite dark kitchen area, which only had one window, and extended it and then improved its natural light levels hugely with these crystal windows you can see in the background, and replan their kitchen to encourage family togetherness and social interaction, and connect them also out to their garden through the windows, connect them to nature. So it was a really nice project to be involved in, and that's reflective of a lot of my projects is working with spaces like that and looking at how they can be improved to support mental and physical well-being and connect people together.
How do you feel like that has correlated with your own well-being? Like, how does your practice influence your own well-being, or is it more like which one came first, or are they kind of constantly interacting with each other?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think they are constantly interacting with each other. I think that I'd always been interested in my own well-being. Before I even became an architect, I think I was interested in that, and I would always go and find spaces that I felt improved my well-being, whether that was sitting in the park in the sunshine, or just finding a really nice corner of a house where the sunlight comes through the window, and there's a nice cozy sofa and you have view out to the plants. And I would do that anyway. And I think as architects we really create spaces that we would want to be in in a certain way. So really what I do as an architect is an extension of my own ideas and what works for me and well-being. And obviously you work with clients and they have their own requirements, and you fit those into the puzzle. But I think actually what I've really discovered is that being truly authentic to your own passion and your own interest actually results in a better, more successful business. And that was a kind of breakthrough realization that I've had in my journey around this. And designing for well-being is now supports my own well-being in my life.
I know, and I know you moved, I think, last year or something. So what, like, do you have anything in particular where you say, okay, this is something that always needs to be included, either because you see it with your clients or for yourself, that you're like, okay, these are things I know that are really important to have to focus on well-being and physical mental health?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think for me, so I've actually bought my own property in the last couple of years, and that's been a really amazing journey, because for the first time as an architect, I've been able to have free reign in terms of design ideas and try things out. And so my little flat, which is in southeast London, surrounded by quite a lot of parks and green spaces, is called the Nunhead Nature Flat. And what I've done here is I've created a micro co-living community. I've got 2 housemates and we live together, we eat together, play music together, watch films together, and integrated that into the design of the flat through trying to look at how you can create community through knocking a wall down between what was a small kitchen and a separate living area, making them into one bigger area, and putting a window into that area from the hallway. So when you come in to the hallway in the entrance, you can see into the living area and see what people are up to, and that gives you the opportunity to decide whether you want to join them or you have like a private route to your bedroom. And I've actually created another bedroom in the flat through kind of cleverly replanning it, putting a compact bathroom into what was a kind of wide hallway area. And then also, looking at things like trying to connect, improve natural light levels in the flat with more. I put glass doors in the hallway, so the light from the living room, because that's the lightest space in the flat, comes into the hallway, which was previously completely dark. And then the hallway is lighter, and then you have views into the living room from the hallway, and that has improved natural light levels. And then also a glass door, actually opaque glaze, so it's kind of like translucent, on one of the bedrooms. So when that person has a curtain that they can pull across when they're obviously sleeping and in their private time, but actually in the daytime they can pull that curtain back and it lets the light in from their bedroom window through the glass door into the hallway. So doing these design decisions that actually improve natural light levels was one big thing that's massively increased the well-being feeling of the flat. And the other thing is connecting to the garden. And I built a whole garden during lockdown, as I'm sure many people spent hours in the garden during lockdown, but I was also doing that. It's just I had a sledgehammer and I was building these planters in the garden, and which have now got plants in, and making that really green. And I'm growing things up these kind of trellis work that I've built around the edge of the garden. So connecting people to nature in that way as well. So I've just tried to, seen it as a kind of opportunity to take your average London flat and say, well, how can you actually maximize the well-being in a space? And it's really, really interesting. And it's still a work in progress, like the acoustic separation in the flat. That's something that at the moment, it's kind of like it could be improved. And that's probably like another thing I'd want to try and look at moving forward. I've also built, kind of little desks in the bedrooms next to the window, so you can look out while you're at your desk and see trees, and there's beautiful cherry blossom trees there at the moment. So yeah, those kind of things, all of those different design elements, I try and consider.
I find that really interesting because I haven't really done it since the pandemic, but I used to have this service about, how do you design your space, usually more offices for well-being, and obviously, you have feng shui and all these things that influence it. And what you say, it sounds very similar. Things like, light, plants, space. I don't know if you work with, like, for example, how much sound or noise pollution you get. And it seems to be that there are certain elements that are kind of essential in everything we do. And a question, I guess, is always like, how can you actually make sure they, for example, something like natural day and night, yes, you might have to take down walls. That's not always the easiest to start with, right? Have you designed office spaces as well, or more like living spaces?
Mainly living spaces, but actually we have studied, and I have studied this building standard called the Building Standard. It's an internationally recognized standard for well-being design in buildings, and we studied that last year, and there's quite a difficult exam that you have to pass to become an accredited professional, which we passed, and essentially that includes a lot of different aspects of office design as well. And so I do know about that, but mainly I think there is a lot of crossover in all these different functions. I mean, essentially it comes down to the same kinds of things. But I think we as human beings, evolved in nature. And if we're completely cut off from nature in our kind of artificially created homes, I think that's just it's a disconnect. And natural light is a connection to nature. Views of the sky is connection to nature. Views of plants is connection to nature. Bringing plants inside, again, connection to nature. Natural materials, which we try and promote. Again, you feel material that's a real piece of wood, that has a hugely more beneficial impact than an artificial piece of thing that looks like wood. Bringing all these things together, and then of course, it comes down to whether it's an offices, for instance, you need to minimize the glare. If you get sunlight coming directly into your eyes, trying to look at a screen, that obviously doesn't work. But there's this thing called sick building syndrome in offices, where people go to these offices and they haven't got enough light and they can't see out from their window, and they're not connected to any trees nearby, and they've got artificial air conditioning that kind of recycles the bacteria because the filters haven't been cleaned, for instance. And then they all end up getting ill and having feeling really lethargic and not happy in their work environment. So not comfortable chairs, all these things combined. So it's important wherever you're designing to and have these considerations, and they're often quite similar, I think.
There's also, I think, this theory, or not a theory, I think it's proven actually, the difference between having a lot of straight lines and a lot of curves, and how that relates to your creativity, for example. So I know that, at least in London, I know there are some of these co-working spaces which are, let's have no straight lines, let's just be creative. I'm like, but sometimes you need the structure.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is a really interesting actually area of exploration for me as well, personally, as an architect. Yeah, that second home in London is full of curves and things. Yeah, I think again, if you go back to how we evolved as humans, I think we lived in a non-linear world. I mean, we were surrounded by trees and plants which don't have a straight line in them virtually. So I do think curves are good. I actually this bathroom kind of module that I designed in my flat has a curved wall, and that curved wall is just beautiful because you don't need to have everything as curves, but just bring in a few curves to kind of soften the impact of the geometry that you're surrounded by. I think really does kind of have a feeling of well-being, and um, the energy, kind of the flow of the space, maybe sounds a bit esoteric to say it, but the kind of flow of the space and the energy through the space, when you have curves, it feels kind of more of a smooth feeling of that kind of space.
I'm just really glad that you said it, because I obviously perceive, like, amongst other things, I'm an embodiment coach, so I always feel stuff in my body. Like, I literally feel in my body if there's a straight line or a curve. So I can totally relate what you say, and I'm actually glad that you said it like that, because I think that's how we perceive things. Right? We cannot rationally. Yeah, you can rationally come up with all the reasons, but there's actually also the element where you just know if a space works for you or not. I remember I walked. Is it Charles de Gaulle, like one of the Paris airports where they have lots of carpet on the floor, and it's really, it's all the sound is muffled and like all these little things. I mean, yes, you have rational explanations, but you just walk in and you're just like, it's a whole different feeling, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. And I mean, most people, obviously as architects, we kind of look into why these things are the way they are and why that impacts well-being. But for most people, yeah, you just feel it's a feeling.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to. I think it's I think we as humans, we kind of have an intuition, an initial intuition about a space or whatever that comes before the kind of cognitive diagnosis of why. It's like before the why is like just the feeling.
Exactly.
So that's really true in buildings as well. Yeah.
Are there any things that you haven't been able to incorporate yet that you would, where this feels great, but you haven't been able to actually, bring it into a space or something?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, I mean, I think I would love to. So, I mean, at the moment, the community. So, I've got a lot of ideas about community design and co-living buildings that I think I'd really love to test out on a larger scale. I've visited quite a lot of co-living buildings because another of the companies I founded is called Conscious Co-living, and it's kind of a research and a consultancy around co-living, research organization and consultancy. And we looked at a lot of co-living buildings, and one of the things is I think they can be designed better. I essentially think they're missing a big potential impact, because a lot of them are designed with these studio flats which people live in and have their own private kitchens, and then they design these shared kitchens, but the shared kitchens don't get used very much because everyone's got their own little mini kitchen in their studio flat. And I see a different way of designing those co-living buildings that I think would, by having more shared kitchens, essentially would encourage community interaction. So it would connect people more. It would reduce the carbon footprint because you'd have less appliances per person, and at the same time it would improve human mental and physical well-being through community connection and having larger spaces that people could use. So I would love to test out and do some research really on buildings in terms of community, and find the optimal kind of configuration of kitchens, living spaces, and people's private spaces.
Interesting. I find that interesting because I know something, when I'm an introvert by nature, which a social introvert, but that I know that I sometimes like to have my own kitchen, for example. I mean, I also like the option not to, but and I've heard that conversation before when, I mean, I guess especially in London, there are of course a lot of building projects where people are trying different approaches to, okay, how can we strengthen the community? Not just in London and other parts of the world too. Have you ever heard these concerns about, like, from people where they say, yeah, but I also want to be in my own space? Or how do you make sure you can have both?
Yes, I have, Nicolina, and I think it's a really it is a really interesting one. I was talking to a friend of mine about it yesterday. Essentially, okay, so there's a difference, maybe, I don't know, it's just like a theory, but yes, I think definitely your own private space in a co-living is your sanctuary. So if you're going to live in your sanctuary, you need to feel you need to go there and have kind of some facilities so that you can kind of be there and inhabit that space without needing to interact with other people. So I don't think I'm totally against not having. I think there would still be in this kind of ideal co-living design facilities in your own space for making cups of tea and that kind of having breakfast and that kind of thing. But I think also there is a kind of, and also you'd have to look at what the optimum number of people to share a kitchen. Because I think if you know, say there's 5 people sharing a kitchen, you know the other 4 people really well, and they're kind of good friends, then for a more introverted person, that might not feel like as much of a difficult thing to go and use the kitchen than if there were, say, 12 people using the kitchen and you also didn't know some of them. So I think this whole thing is really super interesting because it's kind of a finding the right setting for different kinds of people, and then it's kind of like finding the right kinds of people to live together that have aligned ways of being and aligned needs. And if you can, and it is a kind of case of finding those aligned needs and ways of being, and then designing a space that suits those kinds of people. And if you get all of that kind of right, then I feel the benefit of being in a kitchen together, where you actually, it's a kind of a little bit of a nudge factor, but you're kind of nudged into interacting, actually results in better well-being, because you're kind of, then you create more of a community with each other, and then those people become your support network. And rather than ships in the night passing each other because you've got your own kitchens, you end up having a better life quality. But yeah, I think it's easy to get it wrong. That's why a lot of people don't like that idea. But it's because a lot of people don't get it right.
Yeah, I find that's really interesting. And kind of for me, what it brings up is like, how well do you need to know yourself before you know what works for you? Because, for example, I have always known I'm a more introverted person. And I mean, I agree with you that, for example, knowing that a small number of people, I guess most people could agree on that. But I think there's definitely an element, like with a lot of, co-living, co-working, ever collaboration, where I always think like it's really important that you also know, at least to some extent, yourself, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what are your preferences, which always will, of course, interact with the collective. So the more you're in the collective, the less you're you, kind of thing. But I still think it's very important, because if you, maybe especially for people who have historically not been able to know that for themselves, because otherwise you kind of never kind of have your really fully own your own place in the whole, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, or if you have experienced that in your thought explorations or something. Like who, maybe it's more like a question of who are the people who are most drawn to try something like a co-living space, for example. Yeah, or something like that. Is that something that's been present in your explorations?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, this is kind of taking a deep dive into it, but yeah, basically, okay, so I have actually lived in quite a lot of co-living spaces myself as well. And yeah, through living with other people, in a way, it helps you get to know yourself. It helps you get to know what your needs actually are, what your preferences actually are, what kind of a person you actually are or want to be, or need to be. So it's always a journey, co-living. I mean, essentially, you might go into a space, and I mean, it's happened to me. I've been into some co-living spaces and lived in some spaces with people that I've realised I'm not quite suited to this kind of group of people. Like they're too extroverted or something. You know, it could be that. It might be, oh, you know, you keep getting home at the end of the day, and they want to talk to you for hours, and actually all you want to do is go to your room and read a book. And then you kind of go on that journey, and you realize, oh, I need that kind of introverted time, so that's one of my needs. And then the next time you move to another space or another place, you're aware of that. So then the next time you can make a better decision, and you kind of gradually find your way to the right kind of setting for you through this journey. But I think it comes down to, you know, in another way of looking at it, it's a personal growth journey, personal self-development journey, and actually co-living is kind of can fulfill that kind of a function. And co-living isn't necessarily always going to be sunshine and rainbows. You know, sometimes it's going to be hard, sometimes you're going to have conflict, sometimes you're going to get triggered. But actually, maybe rather than shying away from that and finding that as all kind of just negative stuff, actually that's an opportunity to grow and to learn and actually become a, you know, more rounded human being that, you know, is more able to be happy in many different environments and with many different people. So
yeah, it's like a relationship.
Yeah, it's a bit like having a relationship with 4 other people rather than just one.
Exactly. No, I think that's really beautiful. All right, I feel like we could chat a lot more about this topic, but what's coming up for you, like in your work, like if there is something in the next couple of weeks or months?
Sure. So this year we've got a really exciting year ahead at Well Studio, because we're doing some webinars about co-living. So we're looking into spatial design in different kinds of co-living, young professional co-living, student living, older persons living, and supported living. And we're going to be doing 4 different webinars over the next 6 months to 8 months, on these different subjects. And we're reaching out to a lot of people in the co-living world to invite them to the webinars. And if you're interested in joining, please come and visit our website, which is wellstudioarchitecture.com or wellstudiocoliving.com. We have 2 websites. And find out about us or connect with me on LinkedIn. But we're really hoping this year to really launch ourselves more into the larger scale co-living world and get some larger co-living projects to work on in the studio. So that's our journey.
Are you working at the moment mostly around Greater London, isn't it? Or have you already expanded into other areas?
Yeah, so we're based in London, and a lot of our smaller scale residential work is in the London area. But for our co-living side of our business, we're really open to working with people anywhere in the world, essentially, on co-living designs. We already have a client in Spain. We've worked with a client in Germany before. We've worked with a client in India. So we're really open. Any you know, well-being design and community design do not, you know, cross borders and boundaries. You know, it's really something that I think everyone can relate to.
Amazing. I love that. And you already said where people can find you. I'll put the links in the description as well. Do you have any last words of wisdom for people who want to start living in a more, in the way that you describe, like bring more well-being into their homes, into their workspaces, and their co-living, like something where people are like, oh, this sounds really interesting. I'm living in a small place on my own, maybe, like, how can I start to really use my environment to bring more well-being in my life?
Great question. Yeah, I would say you can start small with a few little things in your space that can really transform it. So I would say if you've got a dark space, get some mirrors and try and orient the mirrors where the sun's coming in so it reflects the light around the room. I would say if you don't have any plants in your space, get some indoor plants because the visual connection to the plants as well as watering the plants and having that nurturing connection is a really therapeutic and good for well-being thing. I would say colors, try and use colors that are calming to the nervous system, which is lighter colors, shades like a kind of teal green shade or a blue sky color, light whites and grays, and find a balance of colors that work in harmony. And find cozy, find a cozy chair that you can sit in with a rug, and find that physical place where you can have physical body comfort, and then if you are lucky enough to have a garden, find a space in the garden to create as well, where you can sit outside and be in touch with the plants and the sky. And all these things don't cost much money and quite easy to do. But I think can massively help to improve your well-being in your space.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. These are awesome tips. I think even for me, I'm already quite conscious. I think, okay, I need to have another look around my environment where I can do.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as I did? If you have takeaways or thoughts on it, feel free to share them on social media. Tag me at Nicolina Werther and we can continue the conversation over there. Also, of course, if you haven't yet, you would do me a great favor if you could subscribe to this episode or share it with your friends and family. And then lastly, I hope you'll be back for the next episode. I will be chatting with Rachel Samuel, who's a co-founder of a coffee farm and eco-village in Ethiopia. And we will be, amongst other things, once again, chat about intuition and business. Until then.